right? Rub.
Quick! GeForce calls the mech! Children of the...
Luckily, I... Don't punch me! You don't breathe! Do not breathe for me! This smile! It's a cupcake! I am the brave you're the mule! You're the mule! In a minute!
You win!
Directly to the forehead! Special!
Oh, maybe have a tricycle! Quick!
You got... This one!
Go! I'm gonna throw
Opening
back
up a
thank you.
finely aged cask of whoop ass.
Kneel and accept your
done.
Not today, bud!
I will have a place in the great vault! Out of bullets!
It's curtains for you!
I become king! Accept your punishment! This is my moment!
Foot taller!
That won't go easy! My chili recipe dies with me!
Boom! Rat-a-tat-tat! Wrap up!
You're gonna be brisket, bitch!
Taking my claim!
Better get dead, scrub. counting? In my sights.
We're all just remember me like a foot taller.
Freaking multi-kill, yeah! Yoink.
Did you come all this way for that busted-ass map, or are you just here to see me? Didn't know you were such a super fan. Oh, you missed the show? Oh, right. But you're all like, what's up with those husks? Well, it's a thing I do. Check out the screens. So I offered the Sun Smashers a place in our family, but they just wanted guns and cash. They betrayed the family. Oh, then Troy said something great.
Gods don't negotiate.
Gods don't negotiate! I love it! Love it! Like I said, that map is super busted, so go ahead and take it. I'll swing by later to pick it up. You're my most loyal follower, Vault Thief. You just don't know it yet.
I knew you'd find the map killer. Bring it back, and don't let it out of your sight. I lost it once. I won't lose it again. Hey, Vaughn, I'm looking at a head in a jar. You know this person?
Ah, no way! That's my Deputy War Chief Vic! She's my best bronette! Grab that head. They must have been interrogating her in VR. You know, we used that same tech back in Hyperion when we caught a corporate spy. Or when someone's broccoli salad got stolen from the break room and I didn't have time to make more. Anyway, Vic's trapped in a virtual torture chamber. You gotta go in and get her out!
You want me to go into the head?
There should be a VR console by the gate to the HPC. Just hook her head up and your Echo device will digistruct you right into the VR construct. I'd go in there myself, but VR stuff totally squicks me out. No one's gonna take my body apart molecule by molecule without a fight. I'm an analog man! I gotta say, I'm surprised the COV are using VR tech, but, you know, then again, it's pretty cheap these days. I mean, people make entire worlds in there and just live in them. It's weird, though, you know? Most people just revisit worlds that were made, like, 7 years ago.
Vaughn, know anything about these COV statues?
Ugh, the children of the vault have been leaving these suck-butt COV statues all over the place. You know what? We're gonna stick it to those wannabe gods and make our own idols. In my image. Yeah, good idea. From chiseled jaw to legendary calves. First off, go find all my wanted posters. P.S. I am very wanted. If we're gonna pull this off, we're gonna need those pictures of me to feed into the 3D scanner thing. Then we can start printing out the statues that look like me instead. Haha, that'll really tick off the Calypsos. I didn't go from a Hyperion accountant to bandit war chief just to follow orders again. But, you know, after I refused to join that stupid cult, Tyrene Calypso put him... bounty on my sculpted ass. And the rest of me too. But I'm still alive, baby! And I'm still shaking it, bro!
gonna show up.
Vic's plugged in? Awesome. Now get in that digital torture room and save her, bro! You're in the simulation, bro. Vic's somewhere in there. You gotta find her and break her out. Take her to the exit console inside the construct. That'll rebuild her body in the meat space. I need my best brunette in one meaty piece. Oh, BT dubs. When they uploaded her, it probably fragmented her recent memories. You're gonna have to try to find them so you can remind her who she is when she wakes up.
Memory fragment 1. What up, me? Our idiot-in-chief Vaughn finally made one good decision and may be the new deputy war chief of the Sun Smashers. He took a slap in time replacing Deputy Head Cheese after he belly flopped into a frickin' acid pit. Man, that dude knew how to party. Vaughn's alright, I guess, but he's no Head Cheese.
Die for the Calypso!
Jump the walls are out! I wish they were born!
Memory fragment 2. Yo, me, check this out. We found this crazy alien thing. Brought it back to camp thinking we could sell it to the children of the vault. Those idiots are always buying crazy alien stuff like that. We're gonna be slapping rich. Memory fragment 3. Get this, me. So I showed Vaughn the crazy alien thing and he got super weird. Told me to hide it. Ugh! The whole clan could eat Varkid caviar for months if we sold it to the COV. Now I look like the asshole because I have to tell the clan we're not selling it. Slap an idiot in chief. He doesn't know what's good for the clan. Memory fragment 4. It's go time, me! This mouthpiece idiot wants that alien thing, and Vaughn won't sell it. We must be the last clan on Pandora that hasn't joined up with the COV. The Sun Smashers need new leadership. You know who I'm talking about, me. It's me.
Hey, Vic. I'm here to get you out.
No! Can't leave. He'll twist my arms off again. So bad. But then they grow back. I don't understand. It's happened like 50 times already.
Hands off my captive!
You pathetic troglodyte! Line him up!
Forsake these empty clips!
You're gonna regret here.
Trial by fire!
Present for you! You earned it!
Go, Zoe!
Oh, you're getting got.
Soldier! Protect me! This is my moment!
What? That's it?
Doing what I love!
Try to keep up.
What the hell is happening? I don't slapping understand!
Oh yeah, I'm a digital projection inside your own severed head. Don't worry about it.
This is slapping weird. I'm freaking out! You gotta get me out of here!
Hyperion asks, did we ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Nothing to see here.
What a slapping nightmare. Thanks for getting me out of there.
Vic! You're alive!
I mean, technically.
He's talking to me! Hey, Vaughn. Look, I'm a slapping idiot. The COV are messed up. We tried joining them and all they did was murder and torture us. In that order.
I'm afraid I'm gonna have to be pretty brutal with you right now, Vic. I'm gonna need you to give me 100 apology push-ups. When you're done, come join me. We got a new clan now. Go Crimson Raiders.
Crimson Raiders? Yeah, I can dig it.
Hey, as long as you're doing the push-ups.
Oh, hey. You saved my slapping life. Here. I nabbed this crazy gun while we were in that never-ending digital hell prison. You can have it. It's all yours.
Well, this is awkward.
Oh, come on. I mean, I always wanted more me time, right? This is perfect. I get to hang with my favorite person.
I mean, are you me or am I you?
Whoa.
Mind blown. Right? And I'm like 80% mind right now.
Do I need to, like, feed you or whatever?
I think whatever this stuff I'm floating in is keeping me going. I don't even have a digestive system anymore. But I do have taste buds. How about you just drip some gravy in here for me?
You're living the dream.
Maybe getting connected to a torture device for a simulated eternity of unspeakable horrors wasn't such a bad deal after all.
Yeah, high five.
Dude, not cool.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Hey, Vsauce, Michael here, and today we are going to talk about why we dream. What's going on inside our brains? The scientific study of dreaming is called onirology, and for most of history it didn't really exist because you can't hold a dream. It's difficult to measure a dream. You can't taste it. You can't see other people's dreams, and if you ask them to tell you what they dreamt, the results are almost always unreliable. In fact, it's estimated that we forget 95% of the dreams we have, especially within the first 10 minutes of having them. But then, in 1952, something amazing happened. Researchers at the University of Chicago found this. It's a unique type of electrical activity that occurs during a certain stage of a person sleeping. When researchers awoke people during this stage, they almost always reported that they had been dreaming. Also, at the same time, during this stage, people's eyeballs are going crazy, rapidly darting all over the place underneath their eyelids. You can actually see this happening if you watch people sleep, like I usually do. During REM sleep, some pretty bizarre stuff happens. If you look at the electrical activity of a brain that is in REM sleep, it almost exactly mimics the way the brain acts when it's awake. The biggest difference being that the production of chemicals inside the brain, like norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine, is almost completely blocked. And that causes the muscles to stop moving, which is why you can dream about flying or running around or fighting ninjas, but your body doesn't move. People who have a disorder achieving complete REM atopia move around in their sleep and act out their dreams. They can even get out of bed and sleepwalk. Oh, before we move forward, I should say two things. One is that it's possible to wake up and not be able to move your body because you're still in REM atopia. You're completely conscious and you know that you're awake, but your body is not ready to move. On the flip side, you can also be inside a dream and know that you're dreaming. This phenomenon is known as lucid dreaming, and it's particularly attractive because while I'm in a lucid dream, I can make conscious decisions about what I do. I can go fly to wherever I want, or I can have a tea party with Abraham Lincoln. I'm in control, but achieving a lucid dream is quite elusive. Howcast has a great video, which I've put in the description, that gives some tips and tricks on how to achieve one. Researchers were able to deprive mice of REM sleep by using this. Inverted inside a tub of water, way up to the tippy top, meaning that the mouse was only able to sit right on top of this little tiny surface. When that happens, the mouse can still fall into non-REM sleep, but as soon as they reach REM sleep and their muscles relax, they fall off the platform into the water, waking up. What they found was that when mice are not allowed to achieve REM sleep, they have an incredible amount of trouble remembering things. This happens in humans too. If you have people remember word pairs and then you don't allow them to sleep, the next day their memory for that stuff is incredibly terrible. But memory and REM does not stop there. If a person learns a difficult new task during the day, say a new instrument or a new type of difficult puzzle, you can measure the electrical activity in their brain while they do that. And then, while they sleep that night, whether they know it or not, their brain replays those electronic impulses. Many popular theories about why we dream are variations on the idea that while we sleep, the unconscious part of our brain is busy organizing memories and strengthening connections from the day before that we need in the future while getting rid of the junk that would otherwise clog the brain. Now, so the theory goes, these electrical impulses are detected by our conscious brain, and our cortex freaks out and doesn't know what it means, and so it tries its best to create a cohesive story, creating a dream. This would explain why dreams are often so fantastic and seemingly random. They're not supposed to make sense. They're not an actual message from our brain. It's just the results of our cortexes trying to synthesize the noise coming from all the work being done back in the unconscious. Under this way of thinking, dreams are an epiphenomenon. They're not a primary process that has a purpose. Instead, they're the accidental result of a more important process going on behind the conscious brain. But some researchers don't believe that. They believe that dreams serve a primary purpose, and that purpose is to prepare us for threats. They think this because the most prevalent emotions felt during dreams are negative, abandonment, anger, and the most common of all, anxiety. The theory goes like this. Back when we were early humans especially, we had no idea what kind of threats we might encounter during the day. And so, to prepare us, our brain would simulate anxieties while we slept to make us better prepared for that feeling in the real world. So people who had terrifying dreams were better at dealing with anxiety in the real world and had stronger genes. Alright, so the theories we discussed today are quite popular, but they don't really enjoy a consensus. Not everyone agrees on them, and they barely scratch the surface of scientific thought about dreams. But that's kind of the cool thing about dreams. Think of it like this. Here is the Eagle Nebula. a giant structure in outer space 6,500 light years away. But despite its distance, we pretty much know what it's made out of. We know that it's 100 trillion kilometers tall, we know what caused it, and we know where it's going to be in 750 million years. But last night, I had dreams, and no one really knows why or for what reason. And that's pretty cool, and that's why, thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about the world,
A lot of people think it's just all fun and games being a games programmer. You can create anything you want, put in your own personality, add your own little features, and play it to your heart's content. Unfortunately, in the real world, the majority of coders have to work on a project just to pay the bills, putting their nose to the grindstone on titles that they grow to hate, even utterly despise in some of today's cases. So, this episode, we take a look at these scornful software engineers, these pixel repulsors, and these grievant game makers, all of whom hated their work harder than Peter Molyneux on a Fable prequel. But hello you, I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt, 5 angry programmers who hated their own games. When Atari launched a 64-bit Jaguar console in 1993, and yes, it definitely is 64-bit, let's save that story for another day, Trevor McFur in the Crescent Galaxy was supposed to be the showcase game for the much maligned system. In the early previews and static screenshots, the game looked nothing short of stunning. This is because Crescent Galaxy used rendered sprites and objects to give the graphics an incredible sense of depth, so they just leapt out of the screen at you. This was obviously nothing new, as we'd first seen this technique in Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. But unlike Nintendo's game, Atari's offering was displayed in millions of colours and in a much higher resolution. However, all was not as it seems with a horizontally scrolling shooter, as artist BJ West goes on to explain.
Did I hate Crescent Galaxy? Well, you could say that. Don't get me wrong, I loved working on it. It was the first time I was getting paid to do 3D modeling and animation. In fact, it was the first proper game I ever worked on. So I was happy for the gig, and I had no idea what Atari's chronic problems were yet. It wasn't until we were asked to start testing it that we realized just how lacking it was. It was really hobbled by Atari's bosses being cheap when it came to making the carts. The core problem was that the company was run by hardware engineers that weren't really very savvy about game design. It was pretty to look at, but the gameplay is absolute rubbish. My biggest complaint of all is that there's no gameplay ramp, so the first level is just as hard as the last. And there's no music too, all because they wanted to save money on the cart size. Crescent Galaxy wasn't the only victim of this either. There are plenty of other examples in the Jaguar library.
While Crescent Galaxy was widely panned by the press and became the first nail in the Jaguar's very large coffin, BJ himself went on to much bigger things, as he ended up working on hugely successful titles such as the Sim series, SimCity 3000, and the Urbs. Well, if you count working for EA a career upgrade, that is. Bet you're surprised to see this guy feature again so soon. Richard Mad as a Hatter Applin is no stranger to Fact Hunt. In fact, he's become almost as synonymous with this series as a marble-headed misanthrope whose name we dare only say once per episode. But Richard's crazy stories have become a firm favourite with our watchers, so we just had to find another one for this series. But when he's not accusing the mayor of Metro City of sheep molestation or entering mile-long diatribes into his video game code, Ricky's actually complaining about them instead. For instance, did you know that despite being tasked with the job of programming it for US Gold, he absolutely hated Final Fight. As in, the entire premise of it, not just his work. And I bet you thought everyone loved the groundbreaking beat-em-up, didn't you? Well, Mr. Applin explained his disdain towards the side-scrolling brawler during an interview for Retro Gamer magazine back in 2016.
Was I a fan of the original arcade game? Well, not especially. I actually played it again recently on MAME and still didn't think it was anything special. I know a lot of people loved it, but I just don't see anything that stands out. To me, it's just walk, kick, punch, walk, repeat. Give me Street Fighter 2 any day. If that's sacrilege to some people, then sorry, but my lasting memory of Final Fight is nothing but pure hatred. Of everything I ever worked on in my entire career, nothing is as vilified as my Final Fight conversions. It amazes me sometimes. I'll stop by the YouTube playthrough vids of it just to marvel at how worked up people get. You'd think I'd run over their puppy or something. I see a lot of "a child could do better" type comments, but in all honesty, I don't really care. If anyone nowadays, with all the extra technology we have, like MAME, wants to go and do a better conversion onto the Amiga, then I sincerely await the results with interest. I won't defend Final Fight as a fantastic game to anyone, but I still think I did a pretty decent job anyway, in technical terms at least.
We don't really need to tell you anything else about Richard. I mean, this is already his third time in a Fact Hunt episode. But Richard worked on many great home conversions, such as Bosconian, The Godfather, Double Dragon 2, and Shinobi. But he hated Final Fight back then, still hates it now, and even after leaving the games industry entirely, he still remains more mental than a Molyneux memoir. Oh no! I've just mentioned him twice! In the late 80s and early 90s, arcade licenses were big business, and prolific Mancunian publishers Ocean Software primarily led the way when it came to converting these games to home computers. Ocean's big game of 1990 was the Williams coin-op Narc, a run-and-gun affair where you played a member of the Specialised Police Narcotics Unit in a fetching red or blue balaclava, trying to take down the evil drugs lord Mr. Big. The game was most notable for using digitised graphics, a technique that Midway pioneered with Narc and perfected a few years later with seminal Get Over Here simulator Mortal Kombat. Narc, as like Mortal Kombat, also got attention for its extreme levels of violence and controversial themes. Many will remember the delights of the level 4 boss Kinky Pinky, Mr. Big's very own clown-faced purveyor of pornography. It was an okay game, but reeked of being a blatant quarter muncher with his unfair levels of difficulty. Now, the home computer versions were ported courtesy of well-known coding house The Sales Curve, who soon dispatched lead artist and designer Sean McClaw to do the honours. However, Sean was ever so slightly less than impressed by the work of his not-so-accurate colleagues.
Oh my god, I hate Narc. We got the arcade art from Midway, but we couldn't figure out how to get it from the arcade boards into a form we could use. So I basically had to copy what I saw onto a bitmap, which is why Narc looks as shit as it does, on 16-bit especially. We already had a very limited number of frames of animation because of this, and then, for some bizarre reason, the coder dropped the hit frame for the crouch position and made it standard to use the stand-up frame instead. The obvious downside to this was when you were attacked by one of the many dogs in the game, this made the character stand up again and completely unable to shoot the fucking things once he'd stopped being bitten. This ruined the entire game for me. I must have told them so many times about this and they just ignored me. I was fucking livid. Still am.
Narc was far from the first game that Sean worked on, and far from the last. His storied career saw him work on a smorgasbord of hit titles, including Raiden, The Humans, Double Dragon 3, yeah I know that sucked, Tempest 2000, Rodlands, and Postman Pat. But Narc really lived up to its theme, and to this very day, Sean still has to be off his face on crack just to play the bloody thing. Good old Doom. You might have heard of it. Tiny little FPS that did the rounds in the early 90s. Well, it's id Software's creation that is regarded by many as being the greatest first-person shooter of all time. Starting off as a wallet-friendly freeware game, it's not only recognised as being the game that finally made people take the PC seriously as a legitimate gaming system, but also spawned multiple sequels and ultimately into a multi-million-dollar franchise for now owners of the brand, Bethesda Softworks. It also spawned a movie starring The Rock and everyone's least favourite cockney, Dexter Fletcher.
Oi! Keep your fingers out of my soup.
But we'll quietly back away from that one. Anyhow, you're probably wondering how anyone could possibly hate Doom, right? Well, it's more than possible if the original programmer interferes with your work so much he forces you to intentionally gimp it. As the coder of the Sega Saturn version, and the Rasputin of retro himself, Jim Bagley, explains.
I wanted to use the Saturn's hardware to its max potential, and so I wrote a render engine to display the PC levels drawing the walls with a GPU. The problem I came across was apparently John Carmack wasn't happy about this. He wanted it to look exactly the same as the PC version, but it looked a lot nicer and was running full screen at 60 frames per second. He said it had to be drawn using the CPU and not the GPU. He even suggested I use the two DSPs on the Saturn to render the screen, but this would have been a huge memory bandwidth bottleneck, so I ignored that and did it using the two SH2s to render the screen with each of the two CPUs, and did it using the two SH2s to render the screen with each of the two CPUs splitting the draw line, doing a line of each of the walls or floors. I was quite happy with the end result, as the SH2s ran at 33MHz and 28MHz respectively, and I remember playing Doom on a 33MHz PC, and it having to play in a stamp size display to play at the reasonable rate, whereas my Saturn was pretty much full screen. But John just wouldn't have it, insisted I didn't use the custom chips at all. This isn't dissing John Carmack, he's a very talented coder and clever bloke all round, but I was very proud of what speed I got out of the two relatively slow CPUs, and then has to throw that all away, and what was released was a slow jerky mess that I still cringe about to this day.
Despite being forced to make a shitty port of Doom, Jim's work has always been very highly regarded by gamers, especially his ZX Spectrum conversions of the hit coin-ops Midnight Resistance and Cabal. Most recently, he's been heavily involved with the ZX Spectrum Next project, you know, the not scammy one, and continues to be a popular figure in the retro gaming community. So thankfully, it didn't doom his career. I'll get my coat. Well, we've now had 4 stories about people who hated their games. But what about somebody who just plain hated games altogether? Now, this must sound completely ridiculous. I mean, how can you have a games programmer who doesn't even like playing the blooming things? Well, believe it or not, we found one such man. Former Atari games programmer and true successor to the Lordship of Winterfell, Gary Stark. He may have played a key part of the company for the best part of a decade, but surprisingly, he's never actually played any of the many games he's created. Case in point, here is Gary telling us this, in his own words, during an interview about Pit Fighter for Retro Gamer magazine, way back in 2014.
I have to be honest, I was more of a programmer, not a games player. That is why Mark Steven Pierce came in on the project. He was an experienced gamer and he played the hell out of the game to make sure we got it right. In fact, it may come as a surprise to you, but I didn't actually play any games at all. Do I think the game is harshly judged these days? I don't know. I just judge it by the box office. The only way you can truly judge a game is by how much money it makes, and Pit Fighter was extremely successful for both myself and Atari. I never played the game then, and don't play it now, so I'm not really the person to ask about how the game plays or how it compares to other games of the time. We had some really great hardware guys at Atari, some really great musicians, really great artists, and very experienced testers, so I just did the code and left everything else to them. It might seem strange, but it's just how I worked. I guess that's why I left the industry when Atari shut down. I just never had any real love for any of my creations.
So there you have it. Despite contributing to legendary titles for Atari such as Hard Driving, Tubin, T-Mech and Sesame Street, Gary's never played, well, any of them, and left perhaps one of the most bizarre legacies in gaming behind him. Though, in hindsight, that might explain why Pit Fighter is a bit shit. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Have you ever sat back and thought, why do game developers spend years on a game fully aware that it's not very good? I certainly have, to the point I've lost all my friends from constantly bringing it up in conversations, and I'm currently on medication for it. I mean, obviously there's a number of legitimate reasons why. A rushed schedule, incompetent management, or they're simply employed by Ubisoft. But every now and then, these developers make their game awful entirely on purpose. And you wouldn't believe some of the despicable reasons why. So this episode, we take a look at these gimped games, these crippled computer programs, and these nerfed Nintendos that were so underhanded, you've less chance of being scammed out of your money putting it into a Peter Molyneux Kickstarter. But, hello you, I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 games purposely made terrible by dickish developers. Revised edition. We'll start today's episode off with one of the first ever recorded documents of a purposely gimped game, the Atari 2600 and Intellivision ports of Donkey Kong. Now, at its time of release, Donkey Kong was one of the hottest arcade games around. Arcades were seeing queues out into the street to play the copyright-infringing adventures of an Italian woman kidnapping King Kong, to the point Nintendo themselves could barely make enough machines to keep up with the demand. No changes there then. So the hype for a home port of the game was beyond boiling point. And with Nintendo having no interest in home gaming themselves at the time, this honour had been awarded to Coleco, who had the foresight and good fortune to grab the rights before it hit arcades. Donkey Kong's mass popularity was Coleco striking gold. Their own console, the ColecoVision, was in 3rd place in a console race and needed a killer app to take on their rivals. So while they could have cashed in on making Donkey Kong a console exclusive, one bright spark at the company had an even sneakier idea. Why not make even more money by releasing it first only as a bundle with the ColecoVision, so even if you already owned a Coleco, you need to buy another console just to grab it? Then anyone who was still umming and ahhing about buying it, release it on their rival consoles 6 months later, but purposely making them crap, fooling the owners into assuming their consoles are inferior, thus enticing them even further into believing that if they want the true Donkey Kong experience, they need to buy a ColecoVision. It sounds absolutely scummy, doesn't it? But true to their word, the rival ports were completely dire. For instance, the 2600 port makes Donkey Kong look like a depressed gingerbread man who throws cookies at you while guarding Lisa Simpson. And the Intellivision version manages to look even worse, with a giant booger lobbing cheese wheels at you instead. And if making the graphics look terrible wasn't bad enough, they only ported 2 levels of the arcade game to each system. The first level, and that one with the weird ghost things. Then, the icing on this crappy cake, they refused to make an Atari 5200 port of the game due to it having similar components to the ColecoVision, and knowing full damn well they'd be called out on this scam if they did. And you want to hear the most shocking thing of all? Coleco totally got away with it too. After release, Coleco managed to sell a whopping 6 million copies of the game across all systems. An unprecedented number at the time, and pretty impressive even by today's standards. Their sales doubled to $500 million, and their earnings quadrupled to $40 million. Of course, over the intervening decades, talented programmers have proven both the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision were both more than capable of making pretty decent ports of Donkey Kong with their homebrew ports. But you got to give Coleco credit for such a devious way to make their console look superior. Bastards. Ubisoft's seminal Murder People Using Traffic Lights with Your iPhone Simulator, and winner of Most Famous Gibbed Game, Watch Dogs, always had a rocky development cycle. Originally devised as a sequel to Driver San Francisco before being converted into an all-new IP, Watch Dogs was the first game to be previewed for unannounced next-gen consoles at the 2012 E3. But its first bout of ever-growing bad publicity began 2 years later, when not only was the game already 5 years into development announced it would be delayed for a further 6 months, but the released gameplay footage didn't look anywhere near as impressive as its initial showing. This was quite perplexing to PC owners, since Ubisoft had been hyping their close collaboration with Nvidia to make the game as visually stunning as possible. So how could it look notably worse if it was specifically designed to work for top-level graphics cards? But upon release in May 2014, things went from bad to worse, as the PC version was locked to a 30 frames per second frame rate, when it could easily do double that. But sparks really began to fly when a fan looked into the game's code and discovered textures that make the game far more impressive. To the point, it looked just like that 2012 preview all those years ago. So why on earth did Ubisoft purposely make Watch Dogs so terrible? What on earth is going on here? Well, this time it all boils down to good old money. As popular as PC gaming is, it pales into comparison with the success of console gaming. Console games are not only far more popular, they more importantly retail for at least a third more than their PC counterparts. And on top of that, Watch Dogs was being released on 5 different consoles. So to put consumers off thinking they were buying an inferior product would be financial suicide. So the PC port had to be throttled to appear in line with the console ports. So yeah, it's essentially a total opposite of Coleco's plan. It's not just a financial risk in this situation either. There's also the fear of angering both Sony and Microsoft by showing their brand new consoles were obsolete right out of the bag. So being out of favour of the top 2 console manufacturers would also spell doom for your business. In hindsight, the PS4 and Xbox One ports probably were going to use the nicer graphics initially. Ubisoft were quite likely unaware of their specific capabilities in 2012, and the final retail models simply couldn't handle what they had originally programmed. However, there's also the question of why Ubisoft left the texture pack in the PC version's code still. Was it incompetence, or a frustrated employee not wanting years of hard work going to waste? But the only thing we do all know is they replace all the decent characters with annoying hipsters for the sequel. Then referenced a ton of crappy internet memes to hide a rather shallow story. So probably no Watch Dogs 3 anytime soon then. Long before ISIS made decapitations popular, it was cult 80s movie Highlander proving there could be only one, infusing this barbaric ritual into an ageless tale of French Americans pretending to be Scottish, and Scotsmen pretending to be Spaniards.
I'm not Spanish, I'm Egyptian.
But as with a lot of other 80s movie licenses, Connor McLeod's adventures in head dismemberment and infertility proved too much of a temptation for old Mercurian chums at Ocean, who quickly snapped up the rights for the 8-bit home computers. Now, picking up licenses back in the 80s usually revolved around paying the licensee a small upfront fee. Then the rest would be paid in percentage of the royalties. Unfortunately, Ocean's contract negotiator was a bit dippy the day they signed, as it dawned on the company that if Highlander proved popular, the insane amount of royalties that they had agreed to would literally bankrupt them. But what to do? They can't bail as they're contractually obliged to make the game still. So how can they sell a game but make sure no one buys it? By making the game as crap as possible. Yep, the sole reason Highlander is a terrible game is because Ocean didn't want anyone to buy it. It does sound completely stupid, but it did actually work for them. Purposely slowing down the game to a frustrating crawl and making the controls unresponsive meant everyone hated it. And with magazines like Zap64 rating it a lowly 30%, Highlander never entered the top 20 charts, thus ultimately Ocean dodging a bullet. Sadly, the same can't be said about the Highlander movie sequels. Those were rubbish, down to good old incompetence. T.S. Eliot once wrote, "This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper." While it may be considered rather vague and pretentious, it makes for a fitting epitaph for Atari, for not only their final console, that Atari box doesn't count, but also their final ever game, Fight for Life. Now, the Atari Jaguar was released during that awkward mid-phase of a console generation's life cycle. So, while it was easy to humiliate 16-bit consoles with their alleged superior 64-bit power, taking on the upcoming Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn next generation systems was a whole new ballgame. They needed something impressive to compete with them, something of a killer app, and that game was to be Fight for Life. Fight for Life was a 3D one-on-one fighting game created by Francois Bertrand. You may not know the name, but he was responsible for the development of Sega's classic Virtua Fighter. Atari had headhunted him upon finishing his work and offered him vast amounts of money, staff and resources if he could do the same magic for Atari as he did for Sega. Though while Bertrand took them up on the offer, Atari didn't exactly keep to their side of the bargain. He was forever being fobbed off with excuses, delayed payments, and his deadline pushed further and further forward. Francois was forced to not only be director, but also the designer and only programmer on the game, frustrating the poor guy even more. Atari's competence wasn't exactly helping either. Their PR staff was so excited about this PlayStation killer, they were offering gaming magazines review copies less than a few months into development. So, with magazines assuming this was the final product and not just an extremely early preview, Atari were hounded in magazines with negative press, making them angry and demanding Bertrand revamp the entire game. An entire game that had only just begun development. But the final straw began when Atari's paychecks stopped arriving. So, come the December of 1995, Atari owing Bertrand 4 months of pay and the game's deadline approaching that month, Bertrand thought, screw this, and sent Atari an unfinished build of the game. He kept his side of the deal, but also kept the final completed build of the game and wouldn't release it until Atari paid him what they owed. But Atari didn't care that it wasn't the final build, nor that it was a slow, terrible mess. They had something playable to sell, so released it in its unfinished, buggy glory. So, the sole reason Fight for Life is terrible is because Atari didn't want to pay the developer what he was owed and called his bluff by releasing an unfinished product. With dwindling sales, a drought of upcoming games, and ultimately Sam Tramiel's infamous interview for Next Generation magazine, where he boasted that the Jaguar was just as, if not more powerful than the Sega Saturn, threatening to sue Sony if they released the PlayStation 2 for $299, which Sony did, and that the Jaguar 2 was already in development, which it wasn't, made him the laughingstock of the entire gaming industry. Atari shut up shop with the Jaguar less than a year later, with Fight for Life being its final ever commercially released title. Francois Bertrand left Atari and went to work for Activision, developing several PS1 titles, but was kind enough to release the actual final build of Fight for Life online a few years later. So, thus lies the end of Atari. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. If you want a game that's been ruined from corporate pissing matches and marketing completely destroying creativity for the sake of their egotistical image, one needs to look no further than Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. When Capcom first started collaborating with Marvel on fighting games way back in 1994 with X-Men Children of the Atom, Marvel was a very different operation. A comic book company on the verge of bankruptcy, who were more than happy to let Capcom take the reins, which is clearly evident by the obscure characters appearing like the Silver Samurai to appeal to their Japanese audience. However, since their acquisition by Disney in 2009, Marvel has severely pulled back creative control and let their marketing team have final say. You can see early cracks of this in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and the inclusion of Super Skrull in lieu of the Fantastic Four. Capcom tried to spin it that it was to save money and character slots, but it was later revealed that Disney denied them permission. This was all down to Disney's very public war with Fox over them obtaining perpetual movie rights to the Fantastic Four, when Marvel was in desperate need of money and are now refusing to relinquish them, though strangely Doctor Doom still appears. This war with Fox has now escalated to Disney cancelling the comic, all merchandise, and even refusing to allow their artists to draw Fantastic Four characters at conventions. All this to avoid giving Fox any free publicity. Now, come Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, not only are the Fantastic Four once again absent, but now also Deadpool and the entire roster of X-Men characters. As guess who owns the movie rights to them? This is especially heartbreaking for MVC fans, as Wolverine has been a staple of the Marvel-Capcom collaboration since Mutant Apocalypse on the Super Nintendo. Of course, Capcom once again tried to hide Disney's spat by having the audacity to claim they removed said characters because gamers had probably forgotten who the X-Men and Fantastic Four even are. That's right, Capcom reckons we've forgotten two of the most famous comics in history. Amnesia may work as a rubbish plot device with your games, Capcom, but don't insult our intelligence with it. However, in their place are Disney-friendly movie-owned characters, such as the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy. So while good news for movie fans, especially as there's been a distinct lack of games this generation for them, it's quite a slap in the face for people who grew up with the series. Now, before you all ask, those ugly Capcom characters, were they purposely nerfed at Disney's request to make their characters look superior, as told by the ex-employee whistleblower on Reddit? Well, as much as it would be a great way to end this episode, the answer is a resounding no, as evident by the fact the recent update made them all look far more on model. So that piece of drama was all simply down to Capcom hiring crap artists. Thanks, Capcom. Crapcom. You know, I'm sort of getting a hint that some of you want a follow-up episode. Well, I'm sorry that I may have kept you waiting longer than Peter Molyneux's barber appointment, but the US edition of Hidden Pissed Off Programmers is finally here. A quick recap for people who haven't seen the previous episode. Video game programmers get angry, passively aggressively rant about whatever grievances they have by burying it in the game's code, but then never expect anyone to actually uncover it. Then some arsehole digs it up several years later and makes a top 5 video about it so he can pour out views and ad revenue. Last time we looked at British bitterness in game code, and in the next episode we'll be looking at all the Japanese jowling. But this episode is entirely dedicated to the coders from the land of the rising apple pie, with agitated Americans. So grab some popcorn and sit back and watch the rage unfold, as I say, but hello you. I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. Top 5 Pissed Off Programmer Rants, USA Edition. We'll start today's episode with a midway double bill. The arcade version of Arch Rivals and Robotron 64 for the Nintendo 64. Something a certain ranter will have issues with later on in this video. Now, poor old Arch Rivals doesn't get too much love in this day and age, but it's an over-the-top 2-on-2 arcade basketball game, where rules flew out of the window as far as the insane slam dunks. And if that sounds familiar, well, it should do, as Arch Rivals is essentially Midway's precursor to the all-time classic NBA Jam series. Though admittedly, the controls play like complete arse by today's standards. Anyhow, if you were to somehow break into the game's code, a very aggressive staff member will inform you of the game's copyright, with
Copyright 1989, Midway Manufacturing Company, manufacturers of Bally Amusement Games. All rights reserved, so fuck off.
Charming! But speaking of precursors, we also have to mention Robotron 64, the prototype for Smash TV. I'll buy that for about $1 at Sears. But Midway were way ahead of their time in 1997 with one of the first of the now endless bloody 3D remakes that cashed in on our nostalgia with Robotron 64. Unfortunately, whoever programmed the game's nostalgia was permanently stuck in the past, along with their maturity, when they secretly hid the lines,
"Fucked up poohead, fucked up poohead." Another list bites the dust.
So there you go. 2 short but sour profanities courtesy of Midway. Kinda like their business in that sense. He may does whatever a spider can, but 4th place goes to Spider-Man's PC port of his rather excellent PS1 game, and made by those lovely people who went on to make the Tony Hawk games. Thankfully not the shit ones. Neversoft. Now, our angry coder in question today seems to bear quite a grudge with another programmer by the name of Matt Duncan. Here he is being silly on a skateboard. Ooh, I hope he doesn't twist his ankle. Constantly harassing him and requesting to get the poor sod sacked.
You're under arrest, dipshit! No acceleration specified. Fix this, Mr. Matt Duncan. Shit fucker! These aren't equal. Fire Matt immediately. Something's wrong in the state of Denmark.
He starts to get miffed at his work on the villain Mysterio.
Too many soft spots on Mysterio. Now how in the hell did this happen? Unknown state. No Mysterio. Fire Matt. Soft spot. Soft eyes. Fire Matt after kicking him decidedly in the nutsack.
Then starts threatening violence on his Rhino modelling.
Fire Matt. He fucked up the Rhino XA. Actually, kick him in the nuts first. Unknown difficulty level. What in the name of God above?
Before all-out pleading to terminate poor old Matt.
Not enough slots. Fire Matt. What the hell? Unknown impact web XA. Shit! Base is scaling to 0. Fire Matt. Should never get here. Demote Matt immediately. Who's been smoking crack today? Fire Matt immediately, please.
Now, before you all get triggered by this apparent spate of office bullying, don't worry, the angry coder was actually Matt himself writing all that mean stuff. Why? Well, maybe he was trying to get himself fired and knew that the writing was on the wall for Neversoft as their fate was being demoted to making those endless crappy Guitar Hero sequels. Alright, 10 years is some incredible foresight, but I'm still including that joke as I couldn't think of anything else to end this segment with. I'll get me coat.
Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now recently I've been doing a lot of deal hunting on Facebook's marketplace, and yesterday I came across a pretty decent deal on some old high-end hardware from 2012. Now this bundle I found consisted of a Z77 Sabertooth 1155 board, an old i7 3770K, as well as this pretty beastie looking aftermarket cooler. Back in 2012 this would have been some pretty high-end stuff, and I was able to get it all for £129. The seller was selling them all individually, but I came in with a bulk offer, and to my very surprise they actually accepted it, which was pretty cool. That got me thinking. 6 years ago this would have been some of the best top-notch equipment money can buy. Considering I was able to get all of this for less than the price of a modern day Ryzen 5 processor, I wondered just how good it was by today's standards. So let's discuss the individual parts before jumping into a few benchmarks to find out. First of all, let's talk about the board. This is an Asus Z77 Sabertooth 1155 socket motherboard, and back in 2012 it was very expensive. Even today it retails for stupid money in most cases. I paid £60 for this one. It offers multiple PCIe Express slots, support for up to 32 gigs of DDR3, and comes equipped with USB 3 ports at the back. One thing I don't like is this thermal armour. It looks cool, but to ensure it stays cool, there are two mini fans connected to it that make quite a loud noise when loading programs. These can be turned off in the BIOS, but they'll still turn on from time to time on their own accord. You can always disconnect them though. I'd still consider this pretty feature rich, and with support for overclocking and top notch, albeit older i7s, it's still a great component. The downside is of course that it only supports what most would call a dead socket. That brings me on to this. The i7 3770K. With 4 cores and 8 threads and a reasonable used price, this still sounds like a great deal in 2018. And considering I paid £60 for this too, I think that was quite a bargain. Releasing in 2012, this unlocked variant of the 3770 has fantastic overclocking potential, and thanks to this board we can do just that. Before getting into that though, let's look at this mammoth CPU cooler. I'm told this one has been keeping the i7 cool for a good few years, and it certainly looks the part. A sign of a decent CPU cooler is always the big and heavy fan. So with our collection of top tier parts gathered, let's put them together and see how well they do with a GTX 1070 and 8GB of DDR3 memory. First things first, it was time to check out gaming. Immediately I jumped into the BIOS and fiddled with the CPU speed. I left the BIOS screen with the CPU at a very modest 4.2 GHz overclock, but it was an overclock I feel that should be achievable by most without the nervous, oh dear it's going to break feeling. I then thought, okay, let's do it anyway, and cranked things up to 4.5. Bear in mind then that the MSI Afterburner stats in the top left corner are mislabelled, considering our CPU is now running at a faster speed. With Assassin's Creed Odyssey here, the i7 paired with the GTX 1070 ran the game pretty well at ultra settings. Now Odyssey isn't exactly the best optimised game in the world, so we averaged around 40 FPS here, which isn't too different from my Ryzen 5, but we'll get onto that in a minute because I will have a bit more of a comparison occurring a little later on. Here, the i7 more than held its own, and at no point did I see it maxing out at 100% usage. It didn't even get to 99% usage, and I feel that these two in a system still make a great pair. Even considering the i7's age, it pairs with a 1070 very well, and the 8GB of RAM was also more than enough to keep this running smoothly. One thing I want to note in terms of the comparison before we get to it later is how much stutter was eliminated running this game with the i7 than with my Ryzen 5 1600. The game stutters a lot more on the AMD based CPU, which is quite odd considering that's a lot newer, and single core performance doesn't really vary all that much, but as I say, we'll talk about that in a little more detail a bit further along in the video. Call of Duty World War II next, and again we were seeing stupid frame rates with a mixture of high and extra settings. I mean stupid in a good way because our frame rate was ridiculously high. Again, when paired with the GTX 1070, the 3770K at 4.5 GHz was in no way a bottleneck. In fact, it complemented the GPU rather quite well. One thing's for certain, Call of Duty World War II certainly ran a treat, and this is quite a graphically intensive game once you turn the settings up. You can make this look like an older generation COD if you turn everything to low, but it does look good at extra settings, I have to admit. Fortnite, a pretty simple looking title, but one that can be quite demanding, thanks to its use of the Unreal Engine, also ran quite well. One thing to point out is that while I was waiting to join the game, you know, when you and all the other players are just sort of running around gormlessly, that was where we saw quite a few frame dips. The game hovered around 60 FPS and dropped to around 40 on some instances. I don't know if that's because every single player was on screen at the time or the game was just loading assets in the background. I really don't know how it works, but all I can say is it was pretty stuttery at that point. Yet when we jumped out of the bus and landed on the island itself and we were running around looking for enemies, stuff like that, the gameplay really did smooth out, and it was a pretty flawless experience with the high settings. Though there will be some places outdoors where that frame rate does drop, yet it was still more than playable in my opinion, and once again the CPU was no way maxed out, or even close to it. Here we have The Witcher 3, another very graphically intensive title, albeit a few years old now. It can still put a lot of even the most high-end hardware through its paces, and 2012's i7 3770K here did a fantastic job of keeping our frame rates smooth. With the ultra settings here and the post-processing set to high, we averaged around 70 frames per second, which is a pretty decent achievement if you ask me. In fact, the GTX 1070 was more of a bottleneck than the processor. Finally, it's Rainbow Six Siege. Once again, stupid frame rates, 126 FPS on average. This average was taken from the benchmark run along with the other figures, but I thought I'd show you some solo gameplay here just to get an idea of how it performs in the real world. Not really any status to speak of either. 79 1% low there and a 59.1% low means that you'll have a very decent experience with this processor in your system, even when paired with a sort of decent mid-range to high-end card that is the GTX 1070. I was then curious to see how it would compare to, say, my Ryzen 5 1600, the CPU that I run at stock in my system on a daily basis. I looked this up on Google and it seems that it was quite a hot topic, with some people not quite knowing whether or not to upgrade from their i7 to a Ryzen based system. When it actually came to gaming, results were very similar. Take Assassin's Creed Odyssey for example here, 49 FPS with the Ryzen 5 compared to 43 with the i7, a very close result. Yet, as I said before, the 0.1% low on the Ryzen was quite a bit lower. There was a lot more noticeable stutter here than with the i7 3770K. Battlefield 1 was also quite close in both instances. The Ryzen 5 saw a better average. In fact, all the figures were a lot better with the Ryzen processor, yet the i7 still did a pretty fantastic job, not really often dropping below 60. Rainbow Six Siege, again you saw it perform on the i7, 126 FPS. The Ryzen 5 just edged it here with 130, and we saw slightly better minimum frame rates too. Yet, when it comes to real-world gameplay, you're not going to feel these differences at all. But I just want to end on a few CPU comparisons because that's where you'll notice the most difference. For example, when we ran Cinebench R15, the multi-core test with the Ryzen 5 came back with a score of 1141, yet on the i7 we saw just 727. The single core performance was pretty much identical, the i7 edging it by 1 point, so you're not really going to notice any difference there. But what
This video is sponsored by Squarespace. In this current year where honesty is found offensive by some, an even humble gesture of apologising can get you into hot water, self-censorship is often the easiest option to avoid this issue, even if it does come to the detriment of your creative vision. However, one person's restrictions is another person's mass censorship, and the stemming can lead to all manner of over-the-top neurotic cuts. So this episode, we take a look at these silly software suppressions, these crushing console controls, and these bloatware boundarizations. As I say, but hello you, I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. Top 5 overly sensitive forms of self-censorship. A lot of people assume censorship in video games didn't really come along until the early 90s and the release of games such as Night Trap and Mortal Kombat. But it was actually in effect since the very dawn of console gaming, as this entry proves. Now, I know what you're thinking, how on earth could a simple game like Hangman be censored? After all, this was a thing that many kids played with a pen and paper for decades. Well actually, the clue is in the name. Both the man and the hanging part. You see, when Atari produced the first version of VCS Hangman for testing and group evaluating, they became concerned that it promoted suicide with its depiction of a hanged man, even though said man looked like he was made out of Lego bricks. Worried about this potential parental outrage, Atari asked the programmer to change the man into a monkey, because killing animals is fine, right? Incidentally, the Atari 8-bit version of Hangman was left intact, as the California-based company felt that computer users were far more mature and responsible. However, the number of rude words computer users typed into text adventures might dispute that. Back in 1985, British publisher Elite Systems were preparing to release their latest big-name coin-op conversion in the form of Capcom's seminal one-man army simulator, Commando. They would be responsible for distributing the game across the whole of Europe with versions for the Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum and BBC Micro in their lineup. All was going well until it came to releasing the game in Germany, when Elite hit a rather large snag. You see, pretty much all mention of the Nazis in the Second World War had been banned in Germany, and so the release of Elite's Commando was almost instantly blocked. In fact, the illegal display of Nazi imagery at the time was actually punishable by up to 3 years in prison. Germany was a hugely important market to UK software houses. At the time, it was the second largest market in Europe, so Elite had to find a way around this. So what was the answer? Why, change it to a space shooter, of course. And so Space Invasion was born. The exact same game with the Nazi soldiers lazily hacked into space robots and a new plot about some kind of alien invasion with you being mankind's last hope, yada 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 and so on, blah blah blah. Many other games were also cancelled in Germany for the same reason, including id Software's Wolfenstein 3D, perhaps the most famous Nazi-themed game ever released. This ban on Hitler-themed imagery continues to this very day, and it wasn't until 2014 and the release of the New Order that German gamers finally got to play a Wolfenstein game. Even then the German authorities insisted that all Nazi imagery be removed from their game. And now on to something a bit more modern, with one of the most bizarre and high-profile cases of censorship from the last console generation. Back in October 2008, Sony were getting all hyped up for the release of Little Big Planet, a highly innovative platform game that was set to be the hot PS3 exclusive that Christmas. But just before its global release, testers spotted a small issue with one of the music tracks contained within the game. Shortly after, they announced that all copies that had already been shipped to retailers would have to be recalled, with Sony issuing the following statement. During the review process prior to the release of Little Big Planet, it has been brought to our attention that one of the background music tracks licensed from a record label for use in the game contains 2 expressions that could be found in the Quran. We have taken immediate action to rectify this, and we sincerely apologise for any offence this may have caused. Now, you may be thinking that the Quran is a holy book, so surely there can't be anything particularly offensive, right? Well, while far from horrific, they are perhaps not quite as nice as you might imagine. Once translated from Arabic to English, the 2 phrases are, "Every soul shall have the taste of death," and "all that is on earth will perish." So, probably not the greatest for a kiddie-friendly mascot gang. They censored a bloody driving game, Larry, I hear you cry. Well, yes, they most certainly did. And we all knew it was just a matter of time before censorship specialists Nintendo reared their ugly heads on this list. Cruis'n USA was the very first game in the now infamous Cruis'n series that is still going strong to this very day. It was released in the arcades in 1994 by Midway, and it boasted that this cabinet featured the very same hardware that will be found in the upcoming Ultra 64 console. This was, of course, a lie that even master misleader Peter Molyneux would have been proud of, as the Nintendo 64 port ended up being a pretty pale imitation of the arcade original. But that's a story for another day. I want to concentrate on the censorship issues of that disappointing port, and boy, are they numerous. Among the many things that Nintendo insisted on changing for their home version are several billboards with suggestive slogans, animals that could be turned into bloody roadkill are also gone, and the bikini beauties that appeared when you won the race have been completely covered up. But that's not all though. Oh no siree. Images of Hillary Clinton smoking a cigar on a dollar bill were changed back to a real bank dollar note, and a related ending that showed the then American President Bill Clinton in a hot tub full of Playboy models is also gone. Incidentally, Nintendo never explained the true reasons for all the censorship in the game. Neither did they explain why the port was so lacking compared to its arcade parent. despite them claiming it featured the same technology. You weren't fibbing, were you, Nintendo? I could smell another episode coming along here. You know I always like to save the best until last in these videos, and boy, do we have a doozy. Perhaps the most ridiculous example of censorship in the history of video games. And what makes this even more staggering is that not only is this not a console game, but it's also a game from a British publisher, who usually aren't particularly concerned about offending people. I mean, did you see my offensive cheat codes video? As it stars the people who got the #1 slot. Now, we're not talking about the original release of Worms Armageddon here, which was first published for the PC back in January 1999, before being ported to various consoles. The version in question here is a 2016 re-release of the game on Steam and Good Old Games. This digital download features a number of omissions from the original game, some of which are understandable, but the rest are absolutely absurd. Team 17 removed or altered some of the team flags due to their similarities to real-life logos, most notably the one that depicted the moniker of Aphex Twin. However, the removal of huge amounts of speech is another matter altogether. Anyone who's ever played a Worms game will be more than familiar with the way those wriggly scamps taunt you and offer up disparaging insults at every opportunity.
Party's over.
They've undoubtedly become one of the key elements of the Worms series. So it's a shame that Team 17 decided that modern gamers may find many of these insults offensive and put them off playing the game. Interestingly, as soon as people realised what Team 17 had done, they set about creating patches for the game by ripping the missing assets from the original CD version. So if you like being taunted by pink floppy things, then there's still a way to do it without visiting public toilets. With the new year coming up, it might be the right time for you to make the next move and finally stake a claim on the interwebs with a professional website. But if you're like me and just want to get straight into the creative part, why not let Squarespace help you? Squarespace offers a unique domain experience that's fully transparent and simple to set up, and it's used by a smorgasbord of people, from musicians, designers, artists, restaurants, and many, many more. You can create amazing looking websites or online stores using Squarespace award-winning templates. It's all so simple. Nothing to install, patch, upgrade, ever. They do it all for you. So, if you fancy taking the next step on the information superhighway, you can get a free trial and 10% off your first purchase simply by going to squarespace.com/Larry Bundy. Hello you! Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes.